What the Falcons do? Rise up. Welcome to Rise Up Reactions, the show where we talk all things Falcons, NFL, Georgia sports, and in general sports news of the day. I'm your host, Dr. Lee Denning. Thank you to everybody who's subscribed so far. I have reached 101 subscribers as of the time of making this video. It means a lot to me that I was able to get to triple digits before the Super Bowl. With that in mind, only 2 teams are left that are actively trying to play in this season. As for the other 30 teams, including the Atlanta Falcons, we are all looking towards the offseason next year. And with that, March 15th will mark the new NFL season. So with that, we have free agency to start with. There's probably going to be some trades going on. There's a lot of things in works right now. Derek Carr may go to the Saints, which would impact our division. Don't know where they're going to get the money for him, but he might end up going there. So we'll see what happens with him. But there's a bunch of other moves. Tom Brady's retired, so that's no longer an option on the table. We don't know what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers, but a lot of that doesn't really impact the Falcons too much. What does impact us is the fact that we are going to have the second best salary cap situation going into free agency. Now, salary cap has been announced to be very close to $225 million. I'm going to use a website called Spot Track to keep up with it and kind of keep up with what the Falcons are doing. The first thing I would say, we are expected to have about $52 to $53 million before making any cuts off of the roster. Now, Marcus Mariota, I have zero expectation that he stays on the team. He is going to be worth $14.5 million if he stays on the roster. He kind of quit on the team. I kind of understand it. I also kind of think you're a professional, and even if you're a little butthurt, you should kind of stick around for that kind of money. But we're probably going to cut him, and we will still be on the hook for $2.5 million, but we'll save $12 million by cutting him. That's going to be a major amount of money because that's going to allow us to hire maybe an extra defensive player or a couple of guys for a little lower cost. So, with that in mind, let's kind of look through here and see what we got for the Falcons. So, who are some of the free agent targets we need to be shooting for? This really is going to depend on what our draft strategy might be. I certainly think that we need to be focusing on the trenches, much like all the other Falcons fans out there. We need to be focusing particularly on the defensive line to get Grady Jarrett some help because he desperately needs it. So guys that might be able to help. There's at least 3 high-name guys or high-profile guys that are going to be available coming into this offseason that are unrestricted free agents, and the teams that they're currently on are in cap hell, so they're probably not going to be able to re-sign them. Javon Hargrave with the Philadelphia Eagles, they're probably not going to be willing to pay him the kind of money he's asking for, but he would be obviously an incredible veteran presence. He's going to be towards the end of his 30-year-old year by the time he starts the next season. He's expected to command somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 to $20 million per year. Again, with him being 30 years old, I don't think we need to extend him or give him a long contract, but he's a guy that, we could do somewhere around that $17 million for 3 years and expect to have him until he retires, and hopefully he would be a solid veteran presence and a producer for our team for at least a few years. I am very much of the mindset you do have to keep an eye on player age, player health, and being in that mid-30s range myself, I don't play a harsh sport, but I certainly have appreciated changes in my early 30s that I didn't appreciate when I was in my 20s. So I think there is something to the health of some of these guys, even though they're in peak condition. So he's a guy that I certainly think we should target, but not someone that's as high as this next guy. Daron Payne with the Washington Commies. He is going to be much younger. He is only going to be 26 years old starting in the 2023 season. He is coming off a rookie deal, and again, they don't have the money to pay him what he wants. He is probably going to be somewhere in that $17 to $21 million range, primarily because of his age. Where Javon Hargrave may be slightly discounted because he's a little bit older, we're going to have to pay a premium for Payne, and if we do pay a premium for him, I think it should probably be a 5-year deal. Maybe we even front load the deal so that we're not dealing with a lot of dead cap towards the end because we certainly have the money to pay now. Maybe there's 3 guaranteed years with 2 possible voided years. There's a lot of things that they can do to try and make this work. But I do think he is a guy that we could certainly pay and probably should pay because of the production that he's had, that closer to $20 million per year range. Again, I'm not saying we should sign all of these guys. I'm just giving us options at that position. Another guy would be Dalvin Tomlinson, one of the lone bright spots on the Minnesota Vikings defensive line. He has been a force for them for several years now. And again, another guy who is a little bit older. He's going to be starting starting his starting as a 29-year-old this coming season. So not a guy that I think we have to pay a ton for. Out of the three that I've mentioned so far, he would probably be the cheapest because he doesn't have the stats to back it up, and he is a little bit older. So a guy that I could see us hiring for 3 or 4 years, maybe an $8 to $10 million a year guy. Again, if we get one, I don't think we need many more. We don't want to be paying a ton of money to bench players. And that's kind of what we would end up with here if we choose a defensive interior lineman. Now, if we're going to do a defensive interior lineman for that kind of money, I think that drastically alters our draft strategy. Then we can start focusing a little bit different. We may want to try to get one of those edge rushers. Now, the two that are projected to go kind of in that somewhere between 5 and 8 range, depending on what other teams do, would be Myles Murphy out of Clemson and Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech, I believe. Both of them are incredibly high upside players. I don't know that either of them will be available. I kind of think that Bryan Bresee is going to be the best defensive player available at the time of our draft pick. I'm very hopeful, though, that 4 teams ahead of us will feel like they need to take a quarterback, and we might end up with a little bit extra defensive talent. So just think about it. We are picking number 8, or we're picking the 8th overall pick here. So if you have a team take C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, Will Levis, and Anthony Richardson, well, now you've got, we would be the 4th team to probably take a defensive player, where I anticipate that Jalen Carter and Will Anderson would already be gone, but then you're left with the possibility of Bryan Bresee, Tyree Wilson, or with Myles Murphy. And I think we would be solid with any of them, but I think we may even want to defer the idea of getting one of these defensive interiors if we truly think that Bryan Bresee is going to be our guy. Now, could he certainly sit behind one of these veteran players and learn for a little while? That might be a best case scenario as well, because he will be young. And ideally, we would get a defensive interior lineman in free agency, and we would be able to then supplement that with the draft with a solid edge rusher or defensive end. Speaking of defensive ends, there is one that is incredibly intriguing, but I do think Brandon Perna and his That's Good Sports Broncos will be re-signing him, because they basically have gotten rid of all of their edge rushers, and he was a bright spot on their defense this year, and that's Draymond Jones. He is a little bit undervalued in the market right now, so he's a guy that on the defensive end, defensive edge, might be a solid player. He certainly came in for Bradley Chubb off the bench after they traded him away and had a phenomenal season with the Denver Broncos. He is expected to be somewhere between a $6 to $10 million a year player. For that kind of money, I do think Denver would re-sign him, but if he were available, then that's certainly a guy that I think we could look at taking to also bolster that defensive line. Now, obviously, defensive interior and defensive line has been a major issue for the Falcons. Safety play has also been a little bit questionable for our Dirty Birds. So who are the 2 or 3 best guys that are going to be available at that position? Well, there's one obvious one, and that would be Jessie Bates, who has played lights out for the Cincinnati Bengals for the last few years. They are probably going to look to re-sign him, but they are going to be owing Joe Burrow a literal crap ton of money once they have to repay him, repay him, but to sign an extension on him. That's coming in the not too distant future, so they may not be willing to dish out massive contracts to some of these other guys in the short term here. So Jessie Bates, a guy that's probably going to command somewhere in the neighborhood of $13+ million a year. Definitely a guy I could see joining the Falcons squad. Maybe start in this new scheme that we're going to have under Ryan Nielsen. And again, I don't know that our safeties are particularly good right now. I think they have played adequate football, but there's nothing that just is special about them. Jalen Hawkins hasn't played particularly well the last year or so. He's been an okay plug-and-play guy, but not somebody that I'm just overly ecstatic about. So, it just really depends on what we're looking for here. Richie Grant is a ball hawk, so we might need somebody that's a little bit more disciplined back there, because he does give up a ton of big plays. It would certainly make a lot of sense to supplement both Jalen and Richie Grant with somebody like Jesse Bates. Another safety that might be available Jordan Poyer. He's going to be a little bit older, 32 years old at the start of the new season, but he's a guy from Buffalo who's been an incredibly strong player for him. But again, be a little bit older once we get to this next season. I think he's a guy that we could probably look to pay $7 or $8 million to and get a few years of good football out of him, but not somebody that I think would be a long-term solution for us. Similar to him, Jimmy Ward, who has been an incredible player for San Francisco. He is also a guy that's probably, he's going to be 32 by the start of the next season. Another guy that might command somewhere in that, $6 to $10 million range, kind of a poor man's Jordan Poyer. But anyways, that's just some of my thoughts, guys. We have a ton of money. We need to cut Mariota, though. That's the first thing we've got to do. When we cut him, we're going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of $65 million. I would argue possibly cutting Casey Hayward. The only reason I say that is Casey Hayward was incredibly injury prone this past year. He didn't play a lot for us, and we're paying him a fair amount of money. He is the sixth highest paid player on our team on a 2-year deal. 34 years old. His injury risk is not going to get any better as he goes forward. And he would save $5 million. It would be a $2 million dead cap for 1 year, but it would be a $5 million savings to cut him. And again, that $5 million, maybe it goes to be part of the salary for a younger replacement to him. And again, I don't know what we're going to do in the draft. Whatever happens in free agency may end up dictating what we do in the draft. If we solve, or not really solve, but kind of address most of our defensive needs, maybe we're able to focus on the offensive line and somebody like Paris Johnson. We're looking at him because almost every draft has him available for sure at pick number 8, and he would be probably the best tackle in the draft. And we do have to look beyond Jake Matthews, and certainly need to find a replacement for whatever his name is, for our right tackle position. But anyways, guys, that's just what I think. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Would love to hear if there are any particular players that you're excited for us to potentially try and grab. Again, second best salary cap position could be made a lot better, potentially talking about like $17 million better if we cut Mariota and we cut Casey Hayward. I think it's actually worth it to do that. Not that I'm throwing shade at Casey Hayward at all. I think he's a very solid player and has had an amazing career as a Pittsburgh Steeler. We just didn't get to see what he could do as a Falcon, and it was a gamble that didn't pay off because of injury, and it's not something that I'm willing to do going forward. $17 million is a lot of money that we could even pay to a single replacement player who is younger and would have the durability to be there for years to come. So that's kind of where my logic is coming from, and again, it has nothing to do with him as a player, has everything to do with thinking about the future of the team. I don't think we need to go quarterback. This would be a year where we could potentially get that Will Levis or Anthony Richardson at pick number 8. I think that would be a horrible decision for the Falcons. Now, could either or both of those guys end up being perennial Pro Bowlers? Yes, but Desmond Ridder, he passed his audition as far as I'm concerned. He went 2-2 in his first 4 starts, and we threw him to the fracking Lions Den, going to the freaking Saints to open up, and then throwing him to the Baltimore Ravens defense in the coldest weekend we have had in years in an outdoor stadium in the Northeast. He was never going to do well. You also didn't have his best weapon potentially on the field with Kyle Pitts. So I don't think we've seen the best of Desmond Ridder yet. I think he has certainly earned a shot for at least 8+ games next year to show what he can do. Maybe he comes out and is an electric player. If he's not, then yeah, we wasted a year and we do need a quarterback going forward. But I'm willing to give him a chance to prove himself. But guys, again, that's just what I think for our free agents, at least from a defensive standpoint. I'll talk a little bit more about offensive players that we should be targeting in free agency going forward. But thank you for watching. Let's get ready for the Super Bowl this weekend. And as always, guys, rise up.